You finish a conversation, but it doesn't end with you. Hours later, it's still there, every word, every pause, every tone of voice. You mentally replay their phrases, change what you said, imagine what you could have answered. The real conversation is over, but the version in your head keeps playing out. If any part of this feels familiar to you, you're not alone. And if you ever feel like sharing your experience, the comments are open, because there's a type of dialogue that doesn't need voices. It happens in silence after everything has already been said, and sometimes it's in that mental replay that you finally understand what really happened in that conversation. You relive dialogues searching for clues you missed in the actual moment. The conversation ended too quickly. You responded automatically, nodded, and left. But now, alone, you return to that moment. Not to relive it, but to examine it. You look for details that went unnoticed. The way the person looked away, the hesitation before a word, the tone that seemed neutral but perhaps wasn't. You weren't distracted during the conversation. You were present. But the human mind doesn't process everything in real time. Some things only appear later, when you have space to think. And then you realize there was something there, an intention, an emotion, a hidden meaning between the words. You go over everything again, and again, trying to decipher what was really said when nothing was said openly. Because sometimes what matters in a conversation isn't in the words, it's in the silences between them. Your mind tries to rewrite what you said, searching for the perfect version. You said what you had to say. But when the conversation ends, another one begins inside you. Now you rewrite each sentence, testing variations. I should have said it like this. If I had used this word instead of that one. The real conversation has already happened, but the improved version is still being edited in your head. It's not exactly regret. It's more like the mind needs to find the ideal answer, even if it's too late. You rearrange the words, adjust the tone, remove what seemed exaggerated, add what was left unsaid, like a writer revising a text that has already been published. The perfect conversation exists, but only in mental replay. And maybe that's why you keep coming back to her. Because in real life, words come out crooked, rushed, incomplete. But in your head, you still have time to say everything right, even if no one else is there to hear. Repeating conversations is a way to decipher what you felt but didn't express. You ended the conversation smiling, agreeing, keeping everything under control. But inside, something remained stuck. A tension you didn't name at the time, an unease you didn't let show. Now, alone, you replay the entire conversation, not to change what was said, but to understand what you truly felt. The mind returns to that moment because it needs to process what the body already knew. The irritation you disguised, the hurts you swallowed, the discomfort you ignored out of politeness, convenience, or habit. You go over every detail, trying to pinpoint exactly where that feeling began. Which word triggered something? Which look affected you? And in mental replay, you can finally feel without needing to react. You can let the emotion exist without performing it. Because sometimes you only understand what you felt when you have enough distance to look back and say, so that was it. You analyze the other person's tone of voice in a loop, trying to decipher hidden intentions. That's not what the person said. You can't stop hearing that tone in your head. You repeat the phrase mentally, trying to grasp the intention behind the words. Was it sarcasm? Was it coldness? Was it indifference disguised as kindness? You analyze each syllable as if it were possible to extract the truth from the way it was pronounced. Because people say one thing and mean another. You know that. So you go back to the conversation looking for clues. Was the tone too neutral? Was the pause too long? Did the answer come too quickly? Every detail becomes evidence. Every variation in voice becomes a code, and you become a detective of a message that perhaps didn't even exist. But you need to know. You need to understand if you were imagining things or if there really was something there. So you go over it again and again and again until the person's tone of voice echoes louder in your memory than it did in reality. Mental replay functions as a rehearsal for confrontations that may never happen. You repeat the conversation, but now with a different ending. This time, you don't let it go. This time, you respond immediately. You say what you really think, without softening your words, without backing down. The person says something, and you already have the answer, ready sharp, accurate, impossible to ignore. You rehearse the confrontation you didn't have the courage to start. The mind uses replay as training, as if by mentally repeating the scene, you were preparing for the next time, for the moment when it happens again, and you won't be caught off guard. You test responses, adjust arguments, strengthen your position, all in the safety of thought, where no one can interrupt or judge you. But deep down, you know that confrontation will probably never happen. The person won't bring up that subject again. You won't have the chance to use those rehearsed responses. Yet, you keep repeating them, because sometimes winning the argument in your head is the closest you get to feeling heard. The conversation in your head always has more devastating alternative endings. In the mental version, you always win. You say exactly what needed to be said at the right time with the right intensity. The other person is left speechless. You leave the conversation with your dignity intact, perhaps even with the last word. Everything you swallowed in real life, you release in the replay on this chimney. It works perfectly. You rewrite the ending as it should have been. You don't stutter. You don't hesitate. You don't give in. Your sentences come out sharp, clear, irrefutable. The person understands the point, or feels bad, or recognizes they were wrong. The outcome is always fairer, more satisfying, more yours, because in your head you have total control over how things end. But when you return to reality, the true ending is still there. Unaltered, the conversation happened the way it happened, and no replay can change that. Yet, you hold on to that mental version as if it were real, as if somewhere there existed a universe where you actually said all that. And in that universe, you emerged victorious. You relive dialogues to validate whether your reaction was appropriate or exaggerated. You go back to the conversation because you need to know, did you react correctly? Were you too sensitive, too cold, too rational, too emotional? The doubt won't leave you, so you go over everything, comparing what you felt with what you showed, trying to gauge whether your response was proportional to what actually happened. You analyze your own performance. Should I have been less bothered? Did I have the right to feel this way? You weigh each reaction as if there were an invisible ruler defining what is acceptable. And in the mental replay, you judge yourself more harshly than you would judge anyone else, because you have access to your thoughts, your fears, your insecurities that makes everything more complicated. And perhaps that's what you're really looking for by repeating the conversation. Not the truth about what happened, but permission to have felt what you felt, to have reacted the way you react. to have been human, imperfect, truhavan, if no one noticed. Repeating other people's words is an attempt to understand why certain words still hurt. A phrase keeps coming back to you. You can't get it out of your head. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't aggressive. But it stayed. And now you repeat it mentally, 4G. 4G, trying to understand why it affected you like that. Why something so simple destabilized you. Why you still feel the impact days later. You take the sentence apart. You examine each piece of it. You look for the exact point where the pain entered. Was it the word chosen? The casual tone? The ease with which it was said? Perhaps it touched on something old. Perhaps it confirmed the fear he carried in silence. Perhaps it echoed something you've heard before, at another time, from another person. And you repeat it because you need to name the wound. You need to understand where this pain comes from. Because if you can locate the origin, maybe you can stop feeling it. Maybe you can transform that phrase into just a phrasand, not into something that defines you. The mind uses replay as a defense mechanism. Prepare yourself so you won't be caught off guard again. You repeat the conversation because you don't want to be caught like that again. Disarmed, without an answer, without a suitable reaction. So you go back to that moment and study each movement not out of nostalgia, but strategically. Your mind is training you, preparing you, shielding you against the next time something similar happens. It's an emotional survival mechanism. You map out the weak points. You identify where you hesitated, where you gave in, where you lost control of the situation, and then you build better responses, stronger arguments, more prepared versions of yourself. All so that when it happens again, something in you believes it will you. Don't get hurt again. But there is a downside to that. Because by constantly revisiting the past, trying to protect yourself from the future, you're never truly in the present. You live on alert, in rehearsal, on the defensive, and the conversation that's already over continues to shape you, even though it's no longer happening. Reviving conversations is about resisting their end as if there were still something to resolve. You'll return to the conversation because it doesn't seem finished. There's something suspended, something unresolved, something left hanging in the air, never said aloud. So you mentally replay the dialogue. Not because you want to, but because your mind is still searching for closure that never came. Maybe you were expecting an apology, or an explanation, or just an acknowledgement that it mattered. But there was none of that. The conversation simply ended, and you were left with loose ends. So you try to tie them up yourself. You invent what the person might have said. You imagine the conversation continuing until a point where it finally makes sense. But some conversations don't have an ending. They just stop. And no matter how much you relive them, no matter how much you rewrite them, they will never give you the conclusion you seek. Because the closure you need isn't in the missing words, it's in accepting that some things end without resolution. And yet, you move on. Conversations end, but in the mind, they continue. You go over them, rewrite them, analyze them, rehearse them, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not obsession. It's not weakness. It's simply the way the human mind processes what it has experienced slowly, in layers, silently. You go back to those conversations because they meant something. Because they touched on something real. because they left marks that need to be understood before they are filed away. And perhaps by mentally replaying everything, you're not stuck in the past. You're just trying to understand who you are through what was said and what wasn't. Ultimately, the mental replay isn't about the conversation. It's about you, about how you feel, how you react, how you protect yourself, how you seek clarity amidst the chaos of human interactions. And that, however silent it may be, is also part of living. If this video brought you any kind of recognition, if you saw yourself in any of these behaviors, please leave a like and consider subscribing. Sometimes, knowing that others also do this silently is enough to make the burden